thank you all for joining, and yeah, apologies for Discord as the time was off. Yeah, I see we have a good show out on Twitter, and we have Aries coming on now. So let's kick it off. Hello. Please introduce yourself and yeah, let our community know who you are, what you're building, and maybe what your favorite puppy is. Can you hear me? All right, seems like we're having some audio issues, so just a few minutes.
Hey there. Hello.
Hey, okay, I can hear you now. Awesome.
All right, sorry for that.
No worries. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're building, and what your favorite puppy is. If you have a puppy, or if you could have a puppy, or if you hate puppies, then
Oh,
that's okay too.
okay. I don't really have a puppy, but I do have a cat.
Okay, tell us about your cat then.
But
Yeah.
yeah, sure. But yeah, I mean, anyways, just to do a quick introduction. So I'm very good. I'm currently leading growth and partnerships at Aries Markets. So I'm not so sure how familiar you are with Aries Markets, but maybe I can just do a quick intro. So Aries Markets is a full suite decentralized exchange. So essentially, we want to bring across all the DeFi products together, and this includes lending, borrowing, swapping, and trading. And for the swapping and trading, you can actually do that on margin as well. And on top of that, we also provide account management similar to how you have main accounts and sub accounts on centralized exchanges, all in one platform. So on top of that, we also have a key focus on security and user experience. So essentially, you could say that we want to sort of bring or be like a one-stop solution for all of Aptos DeFi on Aries Markets. So that's a quick intro to Aries Markets. Happy to elaborate further if you have any other questions. But yeah, with regard to my cat, so it's a British short hair, gray, small little kitten.
Nice.
I actually just got it, so still learning as a cat owner, first time.
Well, congratulations. Yeah, it's exciting to have both a new protocol and a new kitten. So that's exciting. So as I understand Aries, it's you're building out some of your own protocols and then connecting into other protocols to provide a really good user experience for end users, something that might rival like a centralized exchange. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's entirely right.
Awesome, cool. So maybe let's dive a little bit into the parts that Aries is building, and then the parts that are connecting into other protocols. Definitely familiar with Liquidswap and the interface, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the parts that Aries built and the parts that you're integrating within the ecosystem.
Sure. So the core component of Aries Markets is its lending and borrowing market. So essentially, it leverages the risk engine of the lending and borrowing market and enables people or users to actually lend and borrow assets such that they can use these assets to swap on the Aries swap feature and also trade on the Aries trade feature. Currently, the Aries trade is not live, given the fact that we are still waiting on full integration with central limit order books such as Econia or Ox. For the swap feature, currently it's live, so essentially users can perform swaps on the platform. So we also do have a toggle for leverage swap, in which we can allow users to automatically lend and swap the assets together such that they can achieve leverage exposure or leverage directional exposure to a certain asset. Yeah, so in terms of the core feature, so the core feature here is the lending and borrowing markets, and the integrated features which we have integrated are the swap features, which primarily will be relying on the Hippo aggregator, and also for this trading feature, we leverage Econia's and possibly even Ox central limit order books.
Nice. So will people be able to place a limit order like at a specific price with the leverage trading feature?
Yes, that's right. So essentially, you can expect to place any kind of order that you can place on a centralized exchange, and you can do that on Aries Markets when we do go live. So I'm pretty excited for that because essentially we want to rival the kind of experience you get on centralized exchanges, and we definitely do want to support that kind of user experience that we haven't sort of seen on DeFi yet.
Very nice. So tell us what are some of the benefits and maybe trade-offs to a centralized exchange versus something that's decentralized like this. For example, fees, gas, speed. Yeah, just want to learn more about the trade-offs between this and centralized.
Sure. So essentially, I think the key difference here in centralized versus decentralized, in essence, I think it's sort of spelled out in the description itself. But in terms of ownership of your assets, I think the usual phrase or like the keyword phrase that usually people use is your keys. If not your keys, not your coins. So essentially, in a decentralized kind of environment, you want to be able to control your own keys. And I think the key difference that you probably would have trading on a decentralized exchange versus a centralized exchange is that for sure you're definitely having to make transactions, and therefore you have to spend gas. And I think Aptos community currently is sort of optimizing for gas usage, and I think we'll definitely have like a better experience once that is sort of live on Aptos. Yeah, so I think that is in generic like a high level overview of the difference between centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges. I think definitely risks do carry out throughout these two different kind of platforms. I mean, we've just seen one of the major centralized exchanges go bust, unfortunately. And I think the decentralized option would pose like a greater proposition in that kind of case.
Yeah, definitely. I think we should aim and encourage folks to move towards decentralization. That ethos of owning your own private keys is very, very important. It's the sole reason we're here to disintermediate the centralized parties, right? It is a little bit, I don't know if ironic, but just surprising that we do trust so much in centralized entities. My own opinion is that this is generally good for the ecosystem, and it's better that it happens sooner rather than later, because this is gonna, at least the people that are here long term that get it, that are here for the right reasons, for the right values, get it. They see that the thing that imploded was a centralized exchange, not a decentralized entity. Although that's not to say that some decentralized entity can't get big enough and then implode, then that's a whole nother thing. That's still risk, and might be like smart contract risk. But it's completely different to what we saw, which was us trusting a person that then seems likely that they did some malicious activity with customer funds. So that's definitely something that can be done with the blockchain, because it's all transparent, it's all there, it's all programmatically executing. So I think people will wake up to the possibilities of this. And maybe on the trade-offs, and this is kind of what I was getting to, is there has to be some trade-offs in maybe cost, right? Like gas or speed. But it seems like Aptos is an entirely new paradigm, right? That allows for some of these trade-offs to potentially be minimized. So yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, how gas and speed works within Aries and how that compares to a centralized exchange.
Sure. So I think primarily with regard to trade-offs in regard to gas costs, those are sort of optimized on the side of the central limit order book. So I can't really comment much, given that we are just simply integrating that order book onto Aries markets.
Right.
So probably have to direct that to probably Konya or even Ox when it comes down to like gas optimizations.
Yeah.
But I think just to expand a bit more about the topic of trade-offs between DEXs and SEXs, I think the key part of the trade-off here probably lies in liquidity as well, given the fact that I guess liquidity is sort of fragmented across different types of venues, and primarily given that SEXs are probably like the most kind of popular platform which most traders would sort of opt to, liquidity definitely is better on SEXs, which is why I think DeFi has sort of yet take over completely. So definitely, as we see DeFi sort of get further adoption and grow, we want to sort of see liquidity transition into DeFi. Currently, I must admit, the liquidity on decentralized exchanges may not be the best. But we are definitely trying to build towards that kind of direction. And I think Aptos being a chain that supports this sort of transactions and in terms of like finality and also cost, I think would definitely be a key value proposition if we were to build up say like a CME on blockchain itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and you're totally right in that liquidity is also a limiting factor, and that might be a function of either the entities that have liquidity, like market makers that are making markets and arbitraging prices and using all these tools on centralized exchanges like credit as one tool, that they don't feel comfortable enough using DeFi yet. So that could definitely be a barrier. Maybe the infrastructure isn't there for third-party custodians to enable deploying into DeFi. I know that's definitely a blocker with some third-party custodians. Managing your own keys on Aptos, the ledger isn't live yet, which by the way will be live soon through our wallet. But there's definitely various small friction points that we still need to build out. It's just a function of how early we still are in building all this out. But we do see some of these starting to adopt, and I think after this blow up of FTX, definitely even to institutions or trading firms that normally would feel more comfortable in a centralized exchange that believe in crypto, that are here for the long term, will definitely start to seek out DeFi alternatives. So I'm generally optimistic that we will see this adoption, and we'll see some of the liquidity coming over to DeFi as well.
Yeah. I think it's a hefty cost that I guess the entire crypto ecosystem has to pay. I think it's really unfortunate. I think a lot of my friends within Asia as well, given the fact that say in like Singapore or Taiwan, most users there sort of rely on like centralized exchanges like FTX to store their coins. And I think this is gonna be like a huge blow to like the trust that most crypto users have, which indirectly or inherently sort of promotes DeFi in that sense. But I think it will also take some time to bring back that kind of adoption and interest after such a huge blow.
Yeah, definitely. I guess what is some of the sentiment that you're hearing in Asia? Was there a lot of exposure to FTX? I would have guessed maybe more Western, but you would know better.
Yeah, so within Asia, I think FTX and Binance is probably one of the top two. I think there's definitely specific sectors for like different target regions, like say like Korea. I think they have like Upbit. For communities like within the Singapore region, I know that Binance is not sort of certified or legal to use. So I think most of the Singaporeans use FTX. As for Taiwan, not to comment too much in detail, but I know that some of their users are parent against Chinese exchanges, so they sort of prefer FTX as well. At least that's what I'm sort of reading and hearing. So most of the users there probably will rely on FTX and were affected by the debacle. For Europe, I think I believe that Binance had futures sort of banned, so I think they might also be using FTX quite sparingly. So I mean, to all extent, I just hope that not too many users were affected too intensely. I guess it's a huge blow, I must say, across the entire space.
Yeah, definitely. That's surprising to hear that relatively Western exchange, I guess Bahamas. I guess use American, but it's relatively surprising to see that it gained so much traction and adoption in Asia, maybe even more than here in the West. I guess here in the West we have Coinbase and some other more regulated ones. So maybe that seems like a gap too, that the fact that there is some lack of regulation, at least globally, that's coherent, led to this type of blow up. What I was just thinking too is potentially one of the trade-offs is access to all these different assets in one place, right? It's there's inherent risk too, just different risk when you use bridges to bring over Solana, to bring over Bitcoin, Ethereum, over to something like Aptos. Obviously, there's a different type of risk when you do it on a centralized exchange. But
Yeah.
at least it feel I don't know why, but it feels less risky, right? That you're just trading Bitcoin against whatever. Um, Whereas on a decentralized exchange, if you're trading wrapped Bitcoin, you're like in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, this isn't really Bitcoin. Um, but similarly, on an exchange, it's not really your Bitcoin either. So maybe that mind shift will come eventually, where people will feel more comfortable with bridges. But you know what's super interesting too? Uh, Billions of dollars are stolen in DeFi, and there's been like 300 $400 million hacks, but it didn't seem to affect it as much as this. Maybe it was just because it was so concentrated. um, but even then, obviously maybe Bitcoin isn't like the best marker, but Bitcoin itself is still holding up above 15K. It's at 16
Mhm.
17K right now. So you know maybe hopefully this is just a somewhat of a bump. People definitely lost funds. Hopefully not people didn't have 100% of their funds on there, so it's just like a 10-20% haircut. um, but yeah, I think people now, hopefully maybe they'll feel more comfortable trusting a bridge like a layer 0 or a wormhole. um, I guess we'll see, right? The time will tell whether those
Yeah.
get hacked or not. But yeah, I guess I don't
Yeah, I think
really. Oh
as
yeah, go
as
for it.
what
Yeah.
as what you said, right? Like the level in terms of penetration across like even like in within Asia for westernized exchange. So I think like that sort of speaks for like the level of exposure and also trust that I think globally FTX has sort of garnered, and the amount of trust that has been broken, I guess, in that sense. Because I think most crypto users treat exchanges as like a sort of like safe haven for them,
Yeah.
and it's probably like where you sort of store your the bulk of your assets in that sense as well. Because when you can't sort of secure your own private keys, you rely on centralized entities to sort of do that, and you sort of inherently give them your trust in terms of managing those funds correctly. um and unfortunately in this case it was sort of misplaced for that trust, and it's definitely going to be a lot bigger than a bigger blow compared to if you were to sort of face like a DeFi hack and your funds were not secured. Because in that sense you take ownership of it, but when it comes to like losing your funds when another entity or you trust your funds with lose that amount of money, I think it's going to be like a heavier blow, which you will which will definitely take like a longer time. And with the contagion effects that have sort of been caused, with like I think the rumor of how Genesis is sort of facing some issues as well, definitely the blow is going to be a lot bigger.
Yeah, I wonder if we come out of this as just everything is decentralized. Like I haven't, I've talked to a lot of people. Some of them definitely affected, but no one has just rage quit. No one has been like, oh, f this, crypto sucks. They're more just like annoyed or obviously pissed off at SBF and everything that's going on, all the centralized entities. But no one. I feel like it's nuanced, right? Everybody that is affected, if they truly understand that if they weren't here just to speculate on price, they get it. They're like, okay, this is why crypto exists. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's what you've also. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I wasn't saying anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that's you've also had a similar experience. Even the folks that have been affected, they're still in it. They took a hit, but they're
Mhm.
they're not rage quitting. They're not saying, "Oh, f this, I'm going back to GameStop."
For sure. I mean, if anything, it's a greater proposition for decentralized DeFi products or whatnot. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's still a huge blow given the fact that with this kind of contagion effects on the backdrop, it's quite hard for people to really trust DeFi, and also, oh sorry, not trust crypto entirely. And also with the regulatory backdrop, it's quite it's going to be quite a difficult or cloudy path to navigate across. So yeah, we probably need more regulatory clarity on crypto as a whole before adoption will come back again, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely, and hopefully those regulatory bodies focus on the real issues, which is centralized entities. I think this was a big criticism of SBF too from the entire crypto community. as he was trying to regulate DeFi in a way that was maybe favorable to him and unfavorable to entrepreneurs or developers that are just building protocols independently. And hopefully regulators are also nuanced enough to see the difference and that they should be regulating these centralized entities that take control of people's keys and custody their assets, and then it seems like they're rehypothecating them or moving them around balance sheets that they shouldn't be moving them around. And then, take a nuanced and thoughtful approach to DeFi. Like, the point that Eric Voorhees made was, if we look at DeFi and these money protocols as simply that, neutral protocols like email, you wouldn't put all these restrictions on Gmail just because it's using the email protocol, right? So we should enable, this is a very powerful tool that enables anybody in the world, anybody with internet access, anybody with a mobile phone, to access money, and money that has US grade, I guess like US grade trust or stability. Like the fact that you can access the US dollar without having to jump through a million hoops and hide it under your bed. Like that's super powerful for 80 to 90% of the world. Like I feel like, we live in this small bubble, even within the US, right? There's a lot of folks that can't easily get access to cashing out their checks, and they have to pay 10 huge fees just to get access to their paycheck every week, every month. And all of that is now being democratized. Just all you need is a phone, all you need is a wallet. Obviously there's barriers to entry. You need to figure out how to custody those keys. But I'm sure when the internet first came out, people were like, what the heck is this? How do I use it? Is this, safe? And I think it does take a large cultural shift, but I think we'll get there, and it'll happen slowly, with things like this. And in my opinion, what happened with FTX is not too dissimilar from what happened to all the banks in 2008. It was a bunch of leverage in the system that was very opaque, so no one really knew how much risk there really was. And once there was a liquidity crisis or some form of suction of liquidity, it just started to implode, right? And FTX, Binance maybe here was like the Fed or JP Morgan or whoever that was like, okay, maybe I'll backstop this. But it didn't. And then that same thing could have happened in 2008 with Lehman, with Bank of America, all these banks and these insurance companies that were taking on undue risk, not doing the right due diligence. And maybe you could blame it on them, or you could blame it on the opaque systems, but all of that is now, there's a solution to it now. Money doesn't have to be this opaque, abstracted thing. It can be fully on-chain. It can be fully transparent. The spreadsheet itself will always, equal what it should equal. There might be separate spreadsheets, as we're seeing with these different chains, but at least within some guarantee, they'll be in sync with something like message passing. But that's something that didn't exist. And these issues that we're seeing in crypto are also recursive in traditional finance, and probably also a bunch of other applications like supply chain tracking, right? Like how the heck do we not know how many chips there are for these cars that are now super expensive, right? Like all of that could be on one spreadsheet. And I think it's up to us, and Ray, you're definitely making great progress here with this product to make these more accessible, to make them look more like traditional products, right? Like people shouldn't feel like they're using something entirely foreign. It's just a small shift in how you manage your own funds, or how you manage your own keys to access this stuff. But I'm fairly optimistic that we'll get there in 5-10 years. We just need to put our heads down, continue building, and make this more accessible to everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly what you said, man. And also I think the user experience part, which you sort of mentioned, in terms of how we can bring this adoption out to the next wave of users, I think that's where our heads are focused at as well. So just to share a bit more about Aries Markets as well. So In terms of like user experience, it's also why we are sort of bringing all the DeFi products into Aries markets. It's because currently we're trying to figure out or solve the issue of like fragmented user experience. So for instance, on Ethereum, if you want to do a swap, you need to go to say like Sushi, Uniswap, or like 1inch. If you need to do lending and borrowing, you need to navigate to Aave. If you want to go access U strategies, you probably go to Yearn or something like that. So essentially, we want to be like a one-stop solution, essentially where all users on Aptos DeFi can just navigate to and then conduct all your DeFi activities in one platform. And that is sort of like the first kind of inning into optimizing the user experience. I think beyond that, as you said, with regard to bridging or creating wallets, I think the key issue there is also that most users are not able to securely keep or secure their private keys in an efficient way. So I think we're sort of building up products to do that. Primarily starting out with our mobile application where you have like a mobile wallet, and also like any kind of like preventive phishing attempts for like malicious links or whatnot. So I think this is like the first steps and essentially the direction that we'll be going with. And bring this to like the next wave of users, potentially even if or even on Aptos, right, when the ecosystem sort of booms down the road. So I think yeah, that's where our head is at with regard to user experience and onboarding users onto DeFi.
Yeah, definitely. And aggregating everything in one place is a huge step in making it way more accessible. Another one that I'm thinking is that private key management. And, you know, I don't think exchanges like a Coinbase, like a Binance are definitely bad. Like, I think they still have a place in the ecosystem. It's definitely still important to do KYC ML, make sure that folks are not sanctioned or not money laundering or terrorists. And I think that those on and off ramps are a key role for exchanges. However, actually giving them the private keys, as we see, is pretty dangerous. But they should have relatively good infrastructure for managing private keys, right? So what about something like a semi-custodial solution, whereas an exchange, you plus maybe like a trusted third party, like your a family member or a lawyer or some estate, someone that can pass on your keys if you die, for example, plus an exchange, all manage a multi-sig for your assets, and then easily allow you to interact with DeFi through that. So that way, let's say you, for whatever reason, lose your device or you lose your key, then you can still access it through the third party plus the exchange. So I think plus the exchanges honestly do build really good interfaces as well, similar to how you're building on Aries. So I think that, and they already have millions of users. So potentially that could be a way that we work together with these exchanges. Again, they're not bad people. Most of them are not bad people. So I think there's still a role for us to all work together with CeFi and DeFi in a way that keeps everyone accountable. That if since I have the keys, you literally cannot move them without me, anyways, right? So maybe that's a way forward too. Not to be too extreme and kick them out of the party.
For sure, I think like competition is always good. You need that for innovation.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So we do have a lot of questions here from the community. Let me go through them and read some of these out loud, and we can answer them. So,
Sure.
okay, the first one is, how do you examine the reliability of the platforms that you work with? So I see you're working with Hippo.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Ox and Iconia. So yeah, how do you manage the integrations and where you connect?
Definitely, I think having a conversations with these protocols and teams will definitely have a lot. So I think we definitely look at the team's background. It's a plus if they have investors backing them, which we sort of test to their kind of quality. Definitely, we will hope to see some audits, preferably from auditors that we prefer, such as like Autosec. I think they've been doing a super awesome job. And if the code is open source, I think definitely we'll be screening them through as well. Yeah, so these are the sort of like processes that we go through when before we even integrate with these protocols.
Yeah, that makes sense. The responsibility, especially on the front end of linking together all these protocols, at the end of the day, it does fall on the developers that build these. So that's definitely very important. And having a process like that is definitely important. Um, for
Mm-hmm.
me personally, I'm not a huge fan of like the aggregators per se, because then you're moving the dependency of the due diligence to another third party. Um,
Yeah.
that's just my own opinion. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think what you're building is super super interesting and very useful. Having this credit engine to power some of these use cases is very very useful. Um, okay, let's go through some of these other questions. So, what's the main difference between Aries and other dexes? So, seems like you work with other dexes, but yeah, maybe you want to clarify this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, so I think it's very common that most users may think that Aries markets also support, as in only supports swapping or trading like your typical DEXs. But rather, as I said, so Aries markets is sort of like a full suite decentralized exchange. So we try to provide all the key products on DeFi, which includes lending, borrowing, swapping on margin, and also trading on margin, and also account management. So yeah, essentially it's all of these products in one platform, not just swapping or trading. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what are some other use cases that you see? Like could I
Yeah, I think
do
the
like could I do like
sorry.
can I do margin liquid staking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's one of the yield strategies that we are working with Tortuga on. So essentially, you can sort of like do or at least enhance your yield from um, TAP staking. So essentially, you can do something like a fold strategy. So we are working with yield strategy platforms, say like Sade, to sort of automate this as well. So these are kind of like the lower hanging kind of strategies that you can do. Beyond that, I think it's more complex in terms of like how you like to do possibly like a long short position, take more unique kind of like directional exposure. But I think that I'll leave you guys or users to their to their imagination when it comes down to this kind of strategies.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess as you do these, there's a little bit more nuance on how you execute them, right? Because like for the liquid staking derivatives, if once you stake it on staking, there's a time delay, right? Like it could be up to 30 days. So
Yes, it's a 30 days rolling unstaking for Tortuga. Yeah.
so then and maybe just like maybe a little bit too technical of a question, but like if I do margin liquid staking and then I need to get
Mm-hmm.
margin called, that APT can't be recalled for like 30 days, right?
Yep, so it can't be recalled for 30 days, but it's based on like a price oracle. So they do incentivize liquidity for TAP to APT. So essentially there will be a swapping mechanism which determines the price. Essentially liquidators still can liquidate the top TAP sort of assets on the
Okay.
platform.
So then the TAP would get liquidated, but then you need
Mm-hmm.
enough liquidity in that TAP. Um,
Yeah,
okay.
so
Yeah.
yeah, they do support liquidity for TAP to APT. Yeah, so you can still swap that asset over.
Right. But then that liquidity isn't like super deep. I guess now okay
Yes, I
now the
guess that's the
question
issue.
yeah now the question my question now turns to like credit risk management, right? So like how much in TAP or staked APT, which is the Ditto one, which I recommend you also support, like how much of it can you take, like how do you manage those risk parameters? Let's say um, just hypothetically speaking, there's only $1 million or let's say $100,000 worth of liquid staking liquidity on the exchanges, so you can sell the T app or staked app to APT, but there's only 100,000. So like theoretically, could I take out like $1 million? $1 million? Can I do $1 million leverage position? Or 200, let's just keep it simple, $200,000 leverage position,
Yeah,
even if there's not enough liquidity to like, you know, get the APT back.
yeah, definitely. So I think there are definitely limit controls that we have set that we will be setting on Aries markets. So essentially, we are limiting the maximum amount borrowable on Aries markets for now because liquidity isn't sort of like, as you mentioned, as deep enough for you to sort of support these kind of strategies, and there might be kind of like black swan events which might cause a rush for liquidity. So I think I actually haven't checked the depth of liquidity for quite a while, but I think last I saw the liquidity is about 2 to 300k. So we will definitely be limiting that across all the different accounts on Aries Markets itself. Yeah, so that's definitely one of the considerations that we had.
That makes sense. And what does that process look like for doing these types of limits? Like, are there equations? Do you put this through like models? How does it look like to know where to put those limits?
Okay. I can't really share that off the top of my head. Because I'm not super technical on that side. But just a quick overview. Essentially, we'll just be providing limits on the maximum borrow amount on each market. So this we will sort of limit on the APT and TAPT market.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. We can bring on some of your devs and risk management folks to help help our community understand
Yeah.
these risks as well. We can do that on another AMA. But cool.
Yeah.
So moving through some of these other questions. Okay. How does the feature of dynamic interest rate and liquidations benefit the user?
Dynamic interest rate and liquidations, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so for the dynamic interest rates, essentially the dynamic interest rates help to guide the cost of borrowing and lending towards a level that maximizes capital efficiency. So essentially you can think of it like basically your interest rates will be amplified, or at least the rate of change of interest rate will be amplified when utilization is sort of above a target level of utilization. So these reactive interest rates that can adapt to the utilization rates for an underlying asset will allow these users to lend and borrow at an optimal risk to reward in terms of interest rate earned. So that is the sort of benefit for dynamic interest rates, essentially lowering the risk and also the reward for users when it comes to lending and borrowing. For dynamic liquidations, so they are designed to make liquidators compete for the profit that they make during these liquidations, and also sort of minimizes the loss taken by this kind of unhealthy accounts of users. So instead of like the fixed kind of profit that liquidators usually earn from like the typical liquidation, the dynamic liquidation introduces sort of a form of variable discount for and also variable liquidation sizes, which liquidators sort of need to compete for. And the important effect that this achieves is that basically liquidators will not be competing in terms of speed, which may require them to jam many transactions into the blockchain, but rather compete in terms of their risk appetite, or in terms of like their assessment of profitability when they liquidate unhealthy accounts.
Okay. So as I understand it, the liquidations happen not at a fixed discount, but more so dynamically based on supply and demand of the assets.
Based on the health ratio of the account, so
Oh, I
basically
see.
we'll liquidate just enough such that the health ratio of the account is into the healthy region. So you will not liquidate the entire account, but just enough such that it can be healthy again.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So we have about let's see, we have about 15 minutes left. If we had some issues with the timing, as some we have daylight savings time, so normally a lot of folks. This is why we're getting a lot of folks joining recently. So if you do have more time, we can stay on. We do like to bring up some folks from our audience. They do ask really good questions. So if you don't mind, let's bring up some folks and see what kind of questions they have directly. So
Sure.
awesome. So tech guy, we're gonna bring you up to speak. You always bring up good questions. You're flying mushroom into space. So
Hey
let's
there.
see.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yeah.
hear you.
All right. My question will be basically on the lending and the borrowing aspects, the protocol. I just have a very simple question. So, in an event whereby the borrower
Yep.
took the money and there's actually a massive dip, let me say 70% dip, on the token
Yep.
he collected, he borrowed, what will be the fate of the lender and the borrower? Once you explain that aspect, I was going through the document, I could not understand this particular part.
So just to clarify your question, so essentially a user borrows an asset which then falls 70% in price. Is that right?
Yes.
So if the supplied asset is in terms of like an asset that is sort of like safe, essentially the user will not be liquidated. In a sense, nothing will happen because the user health ratio will in fact improve. Does that make sense?
Okay. So I get it now.
Wait, so if the value, but if the value of the collateral goes down, right? I think that's what.
Yeah, if the value of the collateral goes down, then depending on the health ratio of the account, depending on how much the user borrows, then that might be a calling for liquidation.
Right, like let's say I borrowed something stable like USDC, and then there's, I mean even Aptos fell like 50% in like a few hours, so like or in a few days. So yeah, I that's a good question. How does that work in terms of liquidations? Like if the price moves faster than what the health ratio is indicating?
Yeah, so for sure. I mean, within Aries markets, definitely there's certain parameters that account for this kind of huge changes in price. So number one thing that we want to verify is that these prices are not manipulated. So we definitely do have confidence intervals between all the price oracles that we rely on. Whenever there are huge changes, we divert to the mean, or we try to reassess the platform whenever, or at least the price feed whenever there are huge changes. That's number one. So we definitely want to make sure that there's no price manipulation in this kind of events. Secondly, I think when there are liquidations or when there's a call for liquidations, as mentioned by the feature of dynamic liquidations, we will liquidate the account sufficiently to the point where it is considered a healthy account, which means a health ratio of below 1. So essentially, once that happens, the account will be sort of healthy, and then as price goes down further, there might be even more dynamic liquidations from there on again. All the way to the point where, say, if the price goes down to 0, or if the account is fully insolvent, and then that's all be taken on by the protocol and liquidated.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Do you have something similar to Maker where there's like an emergency stop in times of extreme volatility?
So that will be dependent on the price oracle. And definitely we do have this kind of black swan events in place, or at least plan for this kind of black swan events, and that will be dependent on the liquidity of the pool. So essentially, like let's say we are listing an asset, a new asset like ABC, right? The liquidity of that asset in the markets would definitely be a key factor when we determine the LTV of that asset. So for assets with thinner liquidity, the LTV will initially be lower, but as that grows, which prevents huge price movements or extreme price movements, then we will slowly increase the LTV. But beyond that, we are actively monitoring all these prices, all these assets, so to prevent any kind of bank run on the protocol itself.
Okay, that makes sense. And all liquidations are done on chain, as in do you liquidate on the exchanges itself, or are there do you put it up for liquidation and then bots or individuals can liquidate? How does that work?
Yes. So as of current, we are running the liquidation bot in-house, but definitely the liquidation module is always open to public, will be open to public. So that calls for more fairer kind of distributions across liquidator and makes it more efficient as well.
Cool. And then the bot that you're running, does it execute on chain? Like, do you look for?
Yes.
Okay, so you're
Everything is
selling on other exchanges on chain with the bot.
Yes, everything is on chain. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, and just for folks out there, the way that liquidations normally work is when there is collateral that is about to be liquidated. These credit platforms put that collateral up. Let's say it's APT. Let's say it's trading at $5. They'll put it up for $4.50, so that it's really attractive for someone. People build bots for them to come in, buy that for $4.50, and then sell it at $5 on an exchange. This can be done by anybody. So if someone wants to buy a bunch of it for $4.50 and then sell it on a centralized exchange or just keep it for themselves, they can do that. But the most common use case is they'll look at the prices on something like a decentralized exchange like Liquidswap, and then buy it at a discount and then immediately sell it through these bots, a lot of times atomically, so there's no risk in the price movement. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, you're right, completely.
Okay, cool. These are complex protocols. It's good for folks to understand them, for them to understand the risks that come with it. There's still risk. DeFi is not riskless. It's probably less risky than centralized, but there's still risk, especially with credit. So do your own research. A lot of these have been robust on Ethereum, and we're aiming to rebuild them here on Aptos to be just as robust. Okay, let's go through a few more of these. So let's see. Okay, and this is an interesting one. So there was a recent, this isn't exactly the question, but there was a recent hack on Mango markets that seemed to have been, I don't know if hack or price manipulation, but how does your platform manage this sort of risk?
Yeah, so I think that was a manipulation on price. Basically, one of the oracles that they were dependent on were manipulated and therefore overstated the kind of collateral that they had on the platform. I guess I think most of the Twitter threads on Twitter probably explains it better than me. But in terms of sort of preventing this kind of issues happening to Aries markets. So as I mentioned, so for the price oracles that we rely on, which are between PIF and Switchbot, we actively monitor a confidence interval between the change in price. So whenever there are huge fluctuations in price changes, we will be alerted and we'll definitely revert to whichever has the best liquidity or the average price. So essentially, we will try to reflect the most accurate price for every asset on Aries markets and prevent any kind of overstating in value of collateral or even borrower assets. Yeah, so that is the kind of at least security that we will be sort of deploying and will have on chain.
Yeah, that makes sense. How do you manage the price of the bridged assets like Sol, Wrapped ETH? Do you look at the price of it on centralized exchanges? Do you look at the price of the underlying or the wrap price? Yeah, how does that one work?
Currently we don't support any of the bridged asset yet because essentially liquidity on Aptos is definitely a lot thinner. As for how the general approach, if you were to do so, definitely we will rely on price feeds from say PIF and Switchbot depending on where they sort of support. And if they do support centralized exchanges, I think that will be like the top choice given that liquidity is the depth of liquidity is best there. I mean you can get different price feeds from different sources, and I think for us we can even do like a weighted kind of average based on the liquidity from each venue. So if like Binance liquidity has 9 times the liquidity from say for instance I wouldn't know, but like maybe like OKEx, you can take a price weighted with a heavier weight from Binance compared to OKEx. So I think that's just an example that we can have.
Man, that's kind of circular though. Like if you're depending on centralized exchanges for the pricing, I guess is the solution eventually once there's enough liquidity on decentralized exchanges that you can use that as an oracle?
Yes, definitely. I think the ultimate goal is to have all liquidity situated on DeFi, and then essentially all the price feeds will be dependent on DeFi as well. But unfortunately, that's not the case across on-chain.
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
DeFi. So I guess we still have to rely to a certain aspect of centralized exchanges.
Yeah, I guess we'll get there. The one that I see is Solana, for example. Like if it was very heavy weighted on FTX and maybe throughout this whole implosion, the price maybe was not super accurate there. That could have been a big dependency, for sure.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so I know we're running on time. This is a question that I love asking. I'm just curious as to people's opinions. But actually, we'll switch it up a little bit. So normally well, okay, two questions then. Hopefully this doesn't detract too much. So one is, what's your point of view on aliens, and two, what's your point of view on ancient civilizations like Atlantis, or I mean, they don't have to be Atlantis, but just ancient civilizations that maybe we haven't found out yet. And is there a link between the two?
Sure. Okay, I'll answer the first question with regard to aliens. I think from a probabilistic standpoint, I think there is very high chance that there are aliens out there. It's just down to whether or not we can sort of find them, and also how you sort of define aliens, right? I mean, sentient beings, as beings they are hard to come by. So I guess like even any kind of you could sort of define aliens as any kind of life form.
Yeah.
And if that's like the lower bar of standard, probably you can sort of find that in terms of the bacteria or whatnot.
Yeah.
But from like a sentient being standpoint, I think it's just the probability of finding that is a lot lower, and therefore like probably we haven't found any aliens yet. As for like ancient civilizations, I think there's a lot of speculation as to like how like ancient civilizations sort of built what they had built, and based on what we've uncovered. I'll be excited to see if there's any proof for that, but at the same time I'm kind of like skeptical to the point where if there was actually proof for this, we would have already found it.
Well,
I mean, we have practically dug out every single part of the earth and explored every single part of it, except for like the deep oceans. But yeah, I'll just be kind of skeptical from that front. I mean, if there was actually proof, then we could actually find that. We would have already found it.
Well, what if I told you that everybody trusted this one entity, and we all thought that it was safe and trusted, and then it all of a sudden blew up, right? I think this trust is an inherent factor that we have between humans, and it seems so fragile, right? Like we all trusted FTX, and we all put our money there, as I'm sure everyone trusted whatever power figure at the time when we all thought that the Earth was at the center of the universe, right? So okay, maybe it definitely for everybody in the audience go and do your own research, but we for a very long period of time we thought that Sumerians near Iraq, Iran, Syria was the somewhat the start of civilization, where we first started to put together cities and we started to figure out farming, and that was not too long. That was almost concurrent with the ancient Egyptians, and that was about 5,000, 6,000 years ago, so around 4,000 BC. And we thought that was the beginning of it, right? But it's also kind of odd that all of a sudden from monkeys to like super advanced civilizations that are building these giant pyramids that probably took thousands, if not millions of people, maybe more than 1,000 years to build, that just came out of nowhere. And it's still somewhat of a mystery how they built it, etc. But recently, and this is agreed upon by like reputable and scholars, and everyone agrees that dating of this is accurate. There's this place it's called Göbekli Tepe, and it is in Turkey, and it's just a little bit north of Sumer, and it's dating back to 8,000 BC. That's when it was abandoned. So between 9,500 and 8,000 BC, there is this massive structure which is buried underground that is huge. It's like you could fit thousands of people inside of it, and it's more than 12,000 years old. So it's double what we thought the original like first civilization started. So like, okay, now what, right? Like now we have evidence of a civilization that was complex enough to build these massive superstructures that survived all this time, and it's not too far away from Sumerians, where we originally thought was the somewhat the cradle of civilization. So there's also evidence of the Younger Dryas impact theory. So every year, actually, this still happens every year. The Earth goes through a set of comets and asteroids that are out there in outer space, and it seems like potentially there's evidence of this too all across the world, that about 12,000 years ago, so around the time that this Göbekli Tepe structure was abandoned, there was a comet that passed really close to Earth, and this was at the end of the last ice age. So It might have hit some of the large icebergs that were on the northern continent. It might have caused them to melt. It might have caused this huge flood, which is a story that is reiterative across South American cultures, across, we see it in Judaism and in Christianity. We see it in Indian religions, that there was this massive flood. And maybe it is because these icebergs just melted, and maybe we had, maybe not one civilization, but various advanced civilizations around this time that just got completely wiped, right? Like anything that wasn't buried underground, made of stone, and that got hit by a giant asteroid and then a massive flood because these icebergs, melted, probably did get wiped. But maybe what was left was this giant, massive pyramid, these massive underground cities. And for whatever reason, because we don't have quote unquote enough evidence, we just don't really want to look into it or don't want to accept it. So, not to turn too conspiratorial here, but maybe the world is not as we know it. And just a few weeks ago, we all thought that FTX was a reputable business that we could all trust. Like, can we say the same thing about archaeology and some of these established structures? Maybe not.
Awesome. Wow, that's super cool, man. I'm Googling as you share. I mean, looking at Sumerians now. Wow, that's awesome, man. 2900 BC.
Look at Göbekli Tepe. So how you spell it here, I'll post it in the main general chat. Here, I'll post a link here on Wikipedia. This is the evidence, and there's more evidence coming out. So another form of evidence is that the Sphinx. So the Sphinx has this erosion, like rain erosion, that is not explainable by the time period as to which the Egyptians lived. So 4,000 years ago, the area around Egypt is very arid, so it does look very much like a desert, like it does today. But 12,000 years ago, that whole area was almost like a rainforest. So there's a lot of evidence on the Sphinx of precipitation or rain that was eroding the stones on it at the base of it. So the theory there is that the Sphinx was probably a regular lion structure, and then the Egyptians came and they changed the head of it for one of their own faces. So anyway, definitely, again, conspiracy theories. I think that's kind of fun to indulge ourselves in, but who knows? Like, some of this stuff might be true, as I'm sure many people were throwing a lot of signs for FTX maybe not being super legitimate for a long period of time. But yeah, check out Göbekli Tepe. There's a new show on Netflix called Ancient Apocalypse or Ancient Catastrophe, something like that goes into some of these details. The main theory, which doesn't seem too implausible, is just that there was, humans for 50 to 100,000 years were like pretty evolved, and we created these like massive stone structures. We didn't just pop out of nowhere 4,000 years ago. We had been building stuff for like maybe 50, maybe 100,000 years, who knows. And there was just a massive extinction level event about 12,000 years ago that caused, that was at the end, that correlated with the end of the last ice age, which caused massive flooding, which caused, towns to be buried, towns to be wiped out by massive tsunamis. And we're now just starting to discover some of it. But it's kind of crazy. Like, how do you, like, what survives 12,000 years other than stones? It's kind of hard to even find evidence of this stuff. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. Potentially it was aliens also that built this stuff, and they're just now coming back to show us how to rebuild. Awesome. Thank you for the time. We'll wrap it up there, and we'd love to have you again. Maybe we bring on some of your dev folks, go more in depth into technical questions, and happy to have you here.
Yeah, definitely, man. Thank you so much for taking the time as well, and thank you for everyone in the audience.
Great, thank you. All right, take care. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.